Hello, everyone. My name is Nitya Narasimhan. I'm a senior cloud advocate on the developer relations team at Microsoft. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'm at Nitya. You probably know that I love sketchnoting. So I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you about visual storytelling for developers, or Sketch the Docs. If you have any comments or feedback, please do hashtag Sketch the Docs and tag me on Twitter. And I would love to hear from you. Also, I'll put up all the materials from this talk at sketchthedocs.github.io later. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it. So a little bit about me. I've actually been in industry for over 2 decades now. And one of the things that I found interesting is over those years, I've kind of been in many roles, but storytelling ended up being a part of all of them. So I'm a PhD in computer engineering, and I'm also a parent. And I realized that the thing that unites both of them is I often teach concepts, complex ideas, to people who might not necessarily be aware of them by telling stories. And as I went into a more research and development career later, I found that all those tools were actually super helpful to me because I could use them to solve problems now by finding connections. We all do things like whiteboarding and kind of like doodling and writing stuff down and trying to see how things connect across domains. More recently, I'm a developer advocate in Microsoft. And I found again that one of the biggest value propositions of visual storytelling is when you have to talk to diverse audiences. It could be developers, students, startups. It could be people who don't necessarily speak English. It turns out that visual vocabularies are one of the most inclusive ways for you to communicate. And so I hope you'll be super excited about this as well. I've got both the link to the GitHub repo and the hashtag at the bottom of every screen. So if you ever need to say something, feel free to share it there. So what are we going to cover in this talk? In this talk, we're really going to have 3 segments. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what visual storytelling means and why you should care. Next, we'll spend a significant chunk of our time actually going through what I call sketchnoting 101, learning a few of the tools that might be super useful for you to have in your visual storytelling toolkit. We'll look at some usage examples as well. And then finally, we'll kind of close out by seeing what you can do to level up and explore this journey on your own. The 2 most important things I want you to take away right now, though, are 1, you don't need to be an artist. I say this because every time I show someone sketch notes, they're like, oh, but I can't draw. And the idea here is that you don't need to be an artist. All you need is your own unique perspective and a way in which you can represent that enough for people to be able to identify what you're talking about. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll have a few tools that'll help you do just that. So we've kept talking about sketch notes. For those of you not familiar with it, what exactly is a sketch note? Well, you're looking at one. The example that you see there on the right, and in fact, if you look at the top right, that little image is literally me sketchnoting that in real time at Create Startups, an event Microsoft held in 2019. And I put this up for a reason. First of all, this is one of my earliest sketch notes, and you'll see it doesn't really look perfect. But the minute you look at it, you can immediately kind of get a sense of what the talk was about, right? Failure is normal. Jason Hand was the name of the author. You can kind of see the big topics and the way the information flows. So what are sketch notes? At a very abstract level, we kind of tend to think about them as ways to do rapid note-taking, usually in real time, to capture very succinctly or summarize something that's happening. But in reality, it's a lot more. It's really about using words and images to kind of capture information in a way that creates visual interest, because now immediately you're engaged with this, that aids comprehension. If you really were paying attention to the whole thing and you wanted a takeaway cheat sheet, this would be a great one, and helps you retain the information and recall it later. And like I said before, Mike Rohde is one of the pioneers in this movement. He says it's really about ideas and not art. It doesn't have to look artistic, but it conveys the idea. So in this talk, I actually want to lay out a roadmap for what I think of as visual storytelling. But first, we need to answer the question of why should you care, right? It turns out that we're all at the core of it, right? We're all learners and we're also communicators. And in both these roles, learning, like how people learn, turns out to be a complicated thing. People learn in many ways. There are auditory learners who learn by listening to things. There are people who read and write stuff, books, in order to gain the knowledge they need. There are kinesthetic learners who basically learn by doing. And then there are visual learners who can absorb information from visual cues and anything that's kind of infographics or imagery that's available to them. And it turns out 65% of your audience has that visual learning capability. In other words, by adding visual toolkits to your portfolio, to your kind of presentations or your documentation, you have another way to address that core of your audience. It turns out that visual information also has better recall. People tend to remember it longer and better. So in the storytelling path that I'm laying out, we're going to talk mainly about sketchnoting today, but it's actually a continuum the way I see it. First, you have sketchnoting, where you're really going to learn how to capture ideas quickly and put them in a very visual format. But once you've conquered that, the next step is how do you get people, in the first case, you've got like the information layer, how do you get people to connect to what you're trying to tell them? And you can do that with something called anthropomorphism. Denise Yu is a great person. Her site has a lot of examples you should absolutely look at. And what that does is by kind of creating characters and giving them emotion. So rather than say the server died, you literally can create an image of a tiny server with eyes and face and looking really sad, right? And people connect to those emotions. Third, the third step of our journey is visual metaphors. So if sketchnoting lets you capture information and anthropomorphism lets you connect emotionally, you still need a way to ensure that people understood what you did. And visual metaphors are ways in which you can take something they already understand, something A, and allow them to learn a thing B by finding a lens through which things that were representative of A can be mapped onto B. And this is a really powerful tool. And if you want to learn more about that, you should definitely check out Maggie Appleton's site, illustrated.dev. So in this talk, we're going to focus mostly on sketchnoting. So I want to talk first about why you should try to look at sketchnoting. What are the value propositions for you? So 3 different scenarios, and there are a lot more in reality. First one, you can visualize talks. So this is an example of Grace Hopper keynote by Padma Shri Warrior, who was the CEO of Electric EV, and then the CTO of Cisco before that, and then Motorola before that. So when she gave this talk at Grace Hopper, I wasn't even in the room. I was actually watching this online. And I sketchnoted the whole thing. And when I was done, I posted it. And she saw it, picked it up, tagged all the influential people who I was talking about, and it got a lot of traction. So by using sketch notes, you can actually create visibility for yourself in these kinds of environments. And this is super important when you think about times like now when we're socially distanced, really. We're trying to connect even though we're not physically in the same room. It's a great way to amplify your presence. But more importantly, the minute I posted this, other people started kind of engaging with me on the thread. Because not only was this a visual thing that immediately grabbed attention in a sea of Twitter text, it actually represented what I thought of the talk. And people who agreed with me or maybe disagreed with me could use this as a way to have conversations around. So it's a great place to do that. A second example is you can visualize other kinds of content. This is an example with books. So what I usually do is whenever I read a book, if I can, I go ahead and kind of sketch note things and remember what I want to think, kind of take away from it. And when I'm done, I usually fold that sketch note and put it into that book. This is an example of a book by Donna Sarkar, and it was really about startups at a time when I was really trying to understand what the issues in startups were. It was a really beautiful book documenting a 1-year journey through a bunch of startups in Nigeria and lessons that they took away to build a toolkit. And when I kind of wrote the sketch note, turned out like even months later, I would just pick it up and I'd remember things like Taiwo Cane Day, right? I was like, oh, I remember what that was about. And to the earlier point, it kind of gives you visibility because the author was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. So think of this as a way to do personal highlights that you can keep in your own content as a reminder for what you found interesting at the time. And third, and this is really what we're talking about today, you can sketch the docs. Why is this important? Any programmer, any developer, any software engineer knows that documentation is the first step towards understanding the systems that you want to work with, right? So what can you do by sketching the docs? This is an example of a sketch note of a Microsoft documentation site. On the right, you actually see kind of like the shrunk down version of the long page, and this is the visualization of it. What they can do for you is provide at a glance recall of something that is otherwise going to be a wall of text and give it to you in a way that lets you quickly glance at it and provide either a visual vocabulary or a cheat sheet for you to kind of catch up where you left off. So in this case, for example, I might want to know how many steps are there. It's so much easier for me to just look at this and be like, oh, I can literally just by even seeing the colors know how many steps are there. And if I wanted to understand later, hey, how do I do packaging again? I can look for the thing with the bright red bow because I know that's the kind of visual cue for package, right? So if you kind of believe that My guidance for beginners, assuming many of you here are beginners, is really simple. The first and foremost thing that you want to think about when you start a sketchnoting journey is be spontaneous. You don't need to be perfect. If you look at a lot of the examples I share, I deliberately share things that are not perfect. Because what makes them so interesting is they are individual. They're unique, they're creative, and they really are just representative of what you were thinking at that time. Do this for yourself first and have fun. The next thing, though, is be persistent. Practice, practice, practice. I found that over my journey over the years, as I did more of this, it kind of became second nature. I just take notes for everything now. I don't even think about it. And when I do, it's also improving my handwriting. It's improving the way I lay stuff out. I start figuring out design patterns for how I can make this more effective. Third, be visible. And I think this is true of everything in software development, that when you learn something, turn around and share it for not only the reasons I mentioned before, but because you yourself will be surprised at how much positive feedback you'll get and how much you're able to engage with people and learn more than you thought possible. Last but not least, be yourself. It may look like you want to be making perfect, unique things, but it's really your perspective that makes it different. And that's kind of what you want to focus on. So we're going to now jump into the meat of the talk, which will be about like different steps you can take to start your own visual sketchnoting journey. But before we do that, I wanted to give you a bit of a mission, right? So if you like this and you want to kind of take the next step yourself, maybe this is something you could try. So if you do have time, grab a pen and paper right now and you can work along with me as we go. But if not, I hope you will go check this out later. So I'm going to give you a second to take a screenshot of this screen if you want to. So what I want you to do is think about a test target, something that you want to sketchnote. You might want to sketchnote a concept. The example here is of something in a documentation site like Azure Docs. Or you might want to sketch a tutorial. That's an example on the right side, which is from Microsoft Learn, which is a training site that gives you a lot of like code labs and stuff like that. Or you might want to sketch a live talk just to get a sense of what it's like to do real-time note-taking. So that's an example from our Channel 9 series, which is really videos of technical talks. You can pick one of them or choose your own adventure. Pick something you like. And then keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. Next, you'll have two options. There are two paths you can take. The first one, and this is visualized so you kind of get a sense of how that works, is a sketch note. And because I've animated this, you can almost see this is literally how I drew the sketch note when I started out. And kind of not to put too fine a point on it, you can see that there is a path to the information. There's various fonts. There's various kinds of icons used. There is a quote in the corner bottom right, which says find your voice. There's lots of things going on. But at the core, it's a single page summary of an idea that you can now embed. I can take this as an image and embed it in a blog post or kind of post it on Twitter as something that immediately catches people's attention. So that's option one for a sketch note. Option two is taking the same tooling that you have and instead creating a zine. A zine is nothing more than a comic. It's still a sketch note, still be done on a single page, but by creating this specific pattern of 8 cells, so effectively you're looking for 8 pieces of takeaway information, you can create this 8-cell comic that you can print out, fold, and then hand away to someone else. And that kind of makes it a really powerful thing. This is what it looks like when printed and folded. So this could be something that is not only useful to you because you're capturing succinctly information you want, but allows you to give people perhaps a takeaway from your talk that delivers the message the way you wanted it delivered. Plus, come on, it's comics. It's fun. So once you kind of try that out, I also want to encourage you. I've done this kind of talk before. Today's is just a 30-minute talk, but I've done like a 1-hour workshop where we actually interactively try to do stuff. And in every single case, people go off, try stuff on their own and share it. And you can see even the person starting this for the first time immediately has an instinct for what they can do, which is amazing. So don't forget to share your work if you try this out. Hashtag it sketch the docs and tag me at Nitya, and I'd love to see it. Pick a target, try a sketch note or a zine, and let me know. How do you do that? That's where we're going to get to the meat of our talk, which is your visual storyteller's toolkit. Here are things that you can learn and try out, maybe even as we go, to kind of get you started on knowing how to do different visual elements. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about fonts, layouts, navigation, quotes, icons, people, colors, and resources. And if you are a mobile or web developer, a lot of these should actually be very intuitive to you. But I also want to map it to what you're seeing on the right side, which is an example of a sketch note, right? You can see fonts are really about kind of like the typography, the size, the kind of, font types and sizes that you're seeing. Layouts is really about the containers and the flow. That's also part of the navigation part. Quotes are things like find your voice that immediately stand out to you. Icons, you can see stuff like the little people, that's an icon. Colors, this one is not colored, but you saw the previous zine was. And then resources. And we're going to go through each of these in just a bit. We'll start with fonts. At the core, visual storytelling is going to start with handwritten words and imagery. So handwriting is actually very, very critical. Fonts are kind of a very powerful tool for you to come up with ways to use that handwriting in various contexts. First, your font style. So here are some examples of font styles, right? You can like have uppercase, double, which is right every letter with 2 lines, triple, every letter with 3 lines, cursive, lowercase, a block pattern, many different styles in which you can write alphabets, right? So pick something, pick 1 or 2 that you really like and use them, keep them in your back pocket as fonts that you can use to add visual interest. So if you're going to try as we go along, use this kind of like as you're listening to me to just sketch out a couple of words using 1 or 2 of these fonts. So the font style allows you to bring visual interest. Custom fonts can then also convey emotion. So for example, if you're trying to say the word stretch, not only can you write it in blocks, but you can potentially stretch out the block sizes, right, to make it look like a stretched word. So you can convey stuff through the font itself. But the most important value for fonts, invariably in sketchnotes, is by using size to create hierarchies. You can immediately tell, oh, like large fonts are for, either like section headers or things that drive your attention to top level ideas. Smaller fonts are like, normal writing is really for kind of the lots of little text and meat or potatoes of the whole sketch note. If you're looking for ideas, try looking at something like Google Fonts. Go there, pick a few fonts that you like and try to hand sketch them. And that's a great way to start. Next, we're going to look at layouts. If fonts were really about the handwriting, and by the way, the main thing for you to do when you're doing handwriting is to start by writing slowly until you're kind of comfortable enough to speed up and still get the same quality. But when you've written all this information down, if you were to just keep writing stuff, that becomes a wall of text. Layouts help you kind of compartmentalize, organize information in a way that you can drive a narrative flow in your story. And so you can almost think of layouts as a powerful way to create a design pattern as you keep using different layouts over time. Initially, you can just pick and choose, try different things out. For example, I tend to use the radial pattern a lot, where you start at the beginning and you kind of keep going out in a radial pattern. And the reason I do that is I find it very valuable for doing talks where I don't know how long the talk's going to be. So I start off with like one main premise and I keep going. And if I look like I'm going to run out of space, I just make the font smaller, but it's still circling. But if, for example, I kind of don't have any more content, right, then I can use the middle to create this giant takeaway message. And it still looks like I planned it all along. So layouts, try different ways to lay out your information on that sheet of paper and kind of use that to drive a narrative flow. Once you've got that, you really want to think about navigation. So your layouts are really helping you compartmentalize, box, containerize your content, but you might want to give the user visual cues as to how they should navigate this. What's the trail they should take? Are there places where they might have 2 different paths, etc.? So it's a bunch of different ways you can do it. These are some examples. By the way, in each of these slides at the bottom right, there's a try it that lets you try this out, ideas for you to try it out on your own, and resources as in this one, where you can go and learn more about different ways to do it. But what I really want to point out over here is that navigation is really to give them visual cues for the flow, allow folks to kind of follow their path around that sketch note. I tend to use arrows with numbers. It's the easiest thing. But as you get better, you can try whimsical stuff. Like I literally made a sketch note that had a snakes and ladders theme. And recently I made one which had a Mario style theme where you are hopping levels as you kind of leveled up. So you can get really creative. But the bottom line is that it's a visual vocabulary. People kind of tend to understand that if they see an arrow, they need to follow it to the next one. If they see one number, then they automatically look for the next, right? So use those. Couple of great places for you to look for inspiration. Map making. Believe it or not, that hand-drawn maps is a great book because back in the day, they had to find out how to kind of really help people navigate large geographical landscapes with cues that gave them information and context about what to find and how to get there, right? So there's great ways you can explore map maker tools for this. But there are also simple connectors and simple kind of ideas for how you organize information. So check those out and find your inspiration in games, maps, and other stuff. But once you've got those three elements under your belt, fonts, layouts, and navigation, that's pretty much the core of a visual sketch note. You've got all your content in there. Now we're really kind of going to the level where you're kind of skilling up and making your visual sketch note look that bit better. First off here is quotes. As I mentioned before, a quote is something that grabs the user's attention. In this case, you can see, take time to be boring, practice productive procrastination. That was my biggest takeaway when I read Austin Kleon's book. And by making it the fundamental quote, I can put a lot of stuff around it as accompanying text, but this immediately grabs me and makes me realize, okay, that was the message. Everything I read, I can now contextualize. So it's super important to do. So when you're sketchnoting a live talk or you're sketchnoting a doc, look for that signature message, look for the keywords that you want to highlight, right? And use those to create quotes that you can anchor a lot of the other text around. We come to my favorite part, the most important one for many, icons. Why? Because iconography is automatically known to people as a way to visually represent information. And you can replace a whole wall of text with an image and save yourself space and create a consistent vocabulary that you can reuse. A great example is that light bulb. Looks like a light bulb, but really most often when we use that, we use it as a way to say, hey, here's an idea for you, or here's a tip or a best practice. So by using that icon and kind of providing the context the first time and then consistently using it everywhere, you're starting to build a visual vocabulary that substitutes in the reader's mind a light bulb for, oh, I should look for all the light bulbs to get best practices, right? Which is awesome. How can you skill up here? Look at something like Noun Project. There are tons of icons. Go there, look for the words that are relevant to your domain. Pick out examples and then try to sketch one of those. Try to get ideas for how you could sketch icons, and then keep a cheat sheet of them that you can quickly use to build your own kind of domain-specific visual language. Next, we're going to talk about people. Now, till now, we're really just conveying information, right? But people are super important because at this point, if you're trying to do things where you're engaging the user, it's really nice to be able to represent the user's role in that content, right? So there are a lot of tips and tricks you can do here. And again, the two big areas that I always trawl, one is Twitter. You can kind of get a lot of inspiration from people. Look for Sketchnote Army. The other is Pinterest. Pinterest is really your friend. Look for sketchboards that look at stick figures, there's an example over there, or sketch notes. The first one, stick people, very easy to draw. Just lines for the arms and legs and a basic shape. Star people, you can see it's a star shape and with a gesture, right? Simple. But underneath it, learn just those two, a single person, a group of people. With just these four kind of types of people icons, you can represent a lot of information, right? You can represent people, a single person's use case, a group activity. You can represent basic postures. There are cheat sheets that literally give you postures for everything that you might want. So you can pick the ones relevant to your domain again. Start with simple outcomes. Once you've mastered basic stick figures, then you can think about adding faces and emotions, and that gets you into the realm of anthropomorphism. And all this time, you could have done everything we talked about with simple pen and ink, black pen or blue pen and paper, right? But colors, adding colors can now add a complete new dimension to make your visual vocabulary stronger. And it actually has two different value propositions. First, color acts as a natural separator. So in this, if I didn't put the colors in there, you'd have seen a sheet of paper with lots of black ink. By adding this blue background, I immediately create separation, and you can see there are various containers without me having to draw container boundaries. Similarly, colors help me create connections. You can immediately tell all the green things are important aspects, and all the arrows are highlighted in green, so I can rapidly kind of follow the path without having to know anything more about it. So from a tip perspective, what you really want to do is have a color palette. If you're on a digital device, use a digital color palette. If you're on a pen and paper kind of person, keep a few shades of colors, markers or color pencils with you so you're ready to use them. The challenge here is accessibility. You always want to make sure you're picking colors that are friendly to folks who might be colorblind. So keep that at the back of your mind. So for all of the stuff, and that kind of gives you the basic sense of a few tools in your visual storytelling toolkit to start your sketchnoting. These are amazing resources to get you started. Don't worry too much. If you want to take a screenshot, you can, but I'm going to put all of these into that repo that you see there, sketchthedocs.github.io. So if you just remember one link, go remember that. I'll put these slides up there along with all resources. But I generally recommend reading the 3 books at the top level and then exploring the 2 sites at the bottom. And with that, we're kind of almost at the end. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to wrap this up and give you some next steps and final thoughts for how you can progress beyond this. So for now, you kind of maybe have a sense of why visual storytelling is important, have a sense of sketchnoting as step 1, and toolkits of things you can pick up, like skills you can pick up, just get started there, right? Where can you go next? So again, my original thought, practice time, try to take one of these paths and practice making something. But once you've done that, you need to start skilling up. So for skilling up, start by practice, and start with pen and paper. You don't need to invest in digital technology until you kind of just like, got some practice with, just a ballpoint pen, paper, and try out different things. First, practice your handwriting. Slow and steady. Slow yourself down, and you'll find that your handwriting gets clearer. You can actually build better effects like bold, cursive, etc. And when people can read it, they kind of get engaged with it. Next, work on pacing. Understand how fast you need to write stuff, what you need to leave out so you can still complete sketchnoting the entire content in a limited period of time. And finally, learn how to leave spaces so you can refactor afterwards. So if you look at this, you'll actually see a lot of white space because I create these spaces to come back later and fill them in with icons, fill them in with color, fill them in with other information that it didn't capture live. But once you've mastered pen and paper, next, explore digital tools. This one is actually, and let me see if I can play this. This is a keynote that I made of Chet Haas and Guy Romain's talk yesterday. And what happens, and I use a tool called Procreate on the iPad. The minute you have digital tools, you now have the ability to kind of change and shift things around. If you don't have enough space, you can expand the canvas. You can create an animation versus a static sketch note. You can do a lot of things. You can also pre-create a whole bunch of cheat sheets, fonts, icons, poses, etc. ahead of time, so that you don't need to have to put in the effort to think about it and you can actually focus on the content. And last but not least, refactor and reverse engineer other people's stuff. So go look for Sketchnote Army, look for Sketch the Docs, look for sketchnoting on Pinterest, on Twitter. Find others, mimic their stuff, see what they do to explore different ways to tell stories and learn from them. And I'm going to leave you with this. If you found this interesting, this was like the speed review. But at Microsoft Reactor, we're running a series called Visualize It, Visualize IT, Visualize It. It's going to be 6 weeks, every Saturday, a couple of hours of hands-on workshops where we'll actually go through a lot of this step by step. If you want to learn more about it, just either follow me or kind of keep an eye on my Twitter or check the Sketch the Docs repo, and we'll kind of have the resources and the event information available to you. And there's a whole bunch of technologists, some of them that you know in the Android community, folks like Corey and Chuki, who are really, really good at this, that you should follow as well. And with that, I kind of this is the end of my talk. So hopefully what you got out of this was kind of like a storytelling sprint. You get a sense of what storytelling is, what visual storytelling is, and why it matters. Some tools that you can add to your toolkit to get started with visual storytelling, examples and next steps for how you can skill up. Again, if you want to join us for the series and get hands-on workshops, it's free and online. Keep an eye on Nitya. And if you want to get resources for all of this stuff, check out my GitHub. And with that, I'm going to wait to see if we have any questions. All right, I'll give it a few minutes. I think you can join at slido.com and use DCPy as the hashtag. Cool. Someone says no questions. You're excited to try this. Yes, absolutely, you should. And if you do, please do tag me. I will be posting a bunch of resources, and it's super, super exciting. This is super interesting. What was the name of the tool for dynamic sketches? So it's actually called Procreate on the iPad, but there are many different things you can use. If you're a Windows user, you can actually sketch right in OneNote, and people have done that. It's a great way to integrate your sketch notes right into your notes. Procreate on iPad is something that a lot of sketchnoters use. It kind of works only on the iPad for now, but it is super, super powerful because you can do a lot of things. You can do animations, you can replay it, you can kind of get palettes, you can get brushes. So it's super nice. Last but not least, I would say there's also things like what is it? Plumbago. There were a bunch of like experimental tools you can use. So Yash says, hey, hi Yash, how can a speaker make their talk sketchnote friendly? This is actually a very, very good question. There is a different talk I did called Chalk the Talk. And one of the things that I always think about is write your notes up for your talk, whatever you're doing, your slides, put them down on index cards first, and then kind of work your way through the flow. Then for each index card, see if you can reduce it down to an image with just a few lines of text, right? So that image can be the visual sketch note. So that's a very easy way for you to first reduce the text heaviness of your talk. But then the most useful thing for me in talks has been to give people a sense of the entire journey, right? So you can use a sketch note up front to literally outline the whole talk and then walk through each of them in a specific slide. And the value for me is at the end of this, I haven't done it for this talk, but I've done it for many others, is that the sketch note is something you can tweet right in the middle of your talk as the summary recap. So it's a great way for you to kind of simplify it. If you're not interested in sketchnoting, you can still make it visual friendly. Use things like Noun Project, use things like Unsplash, use fonts to kind of create visual interest. Lots of things. But otherwise, go check out a talk called Chalk the Talk, and you might get some ideas there. Someone says, I tend to write down everything as I take notes and parse what I really need later. Do you have tips for finding the key parts to sketch as someone is talking? Oh my gosh, yes. So as you take the hardest part when you're kind of trying to sketchnote live is this tension between paying attention to what they're saying and making sure that while you're writing it down, you're not losing that train of thought. So one of the tricks that sketchnoters have done, which I've also adopted, is you don't need to write everything they're saying down. Rather, look in chunks, right? Like listen to about 2 minutes of the conversation, remember a couple of keywords or a signature sentence, write that down. Put the words that really are reflective of icons that you can go and fill in later, then leave space to fill the rest of it later. Most tech talks tend to kind of have a big theme and lots of little detail, so you want to capture the big theme. The second thing that you want to do is, as someone is talking, what I've done is, especially this is a great time now, we're all online, just screenshot the slides where you think you didn't capture everything and get back to that later. Focus sketchnoting on just, 1 or 2 sentences every few minutes that give you kind of anchors to what was happening at that point in time and give a continuous story. I hope that helped. And for what it's worth, if you actually look at some of the dynamic sketch notes I do, take the Chet Haas one, for instance, and kind of correlate it against the talk itself, you might notice that some of it will be literally me writing stuff down, and some of it will be erasing it and then replacing it with just like this big takeaway point. And I think that was the last one. The tool for dynamic sketching is called Procreate. So if you do go to the docs.github.io, at the end of this week, I'm actually going to update it with a list of resources, including different tools that people have recommended or tried out, as well as communities that you should join if you want to engage with other people. And of course, a bunch of sketchnoters that you should follow. All right, I think that was the last question. I'm not sure if there are any more. I'll give it a couple of minutes because I think we do have a little bit of time. But if you have any other questions, absolutely feel free to just tag me at Nitya on Twitter. I love this stuff and I will talk to you about it for as long as you want. I'll also be putting up a whole bunch of my older sketch notes at that repo. So if you want to kind of like take a look at examples or just, reverse engineer something to figure out how you could do the same thing or how you might do it differently, it's a great place to try. And with that, I think I'm going to say thank you, and I hope you all had fun.